Join me on a journey of building a new community around ideas of local engagement to discuss solutions to our national dilemmas. From this place, we can tap into our purpose to ensure its preservation. Place, purpose, preservation. This is perspective. Hello, Chad Connelly.
Hello, Mike Beankball.
How are you doing?
Super good.
Good.
It's only Friday. I expect improvement.
Oh, thank goodness. So, we have a little bio here on the screen when this episode comes, but part of all of this is about one, local community.
Yeah.
And since prosperity is so famous because of the sign, and I use that
everywhere
right?
I go.
Everywhere people talk, oh, you're from Prosperity. Is that the one? Well, this is the one. And the thing is, we have so much synergy of leadership, personalities that are making local, regional, national impact. That it's really interesting that all this is coming here, and you, my friend, are one of those making such a national impact.
I don't know about that, but I sure love home. I tell people almost every speech. Have you been to Prosperity? If you're from South Carolina, you probably get your speeding ticket there. But we're home of 400 or 500 counting the animals, no matter what.
Yeah,
we have a traffic light now. Sometimes there's cars there.
That's
what I roll with, And
that's it.
But people knew it from the furniture store, and they knew it from the back porch. But they also know it now because of the lake.
Now, the furniture store was Ham's Furniture, Prosperity Furniture, that started in early 1900s and was an institution here.
Total.
People drove all the way from Columbia just to come to Prosperity. The back porch was Perry's a meet and three that buses would come in, and Miss Betty Dominic, our Cub Scout teacher,
that's exactly right,
would hold court at the cash register and slicing bread. And people came from all around. They served 300 people a day.
It's unbelievable.
Which in the 1980s was a huge number of people.
Yeah.
And the day it opened was the day Uncle Earl was hosting Governor Connelly.
I remember.
Because Connelly was running against Reagan in the primary in 1980. It was 80, early 80.
Yeah.
And Connelly came, and that was when the back porch opened.
Exactly right. I met presidential candidates there. I met gubernatorial. That's really probably the first taste of politics I had.
Well, Miss Betty was an arch Republican that had her little elephant gold pin on the side of her
brooches, earrings,
and everything. So every Republican running for primary coming through South Carolina would always stop by there. And I had a great time sitting there talking with Elizabeth Dole one time.
Did you really?
Yeah, Bob didn't come, but she was there talking to all the ladies. I was one of the only guys there.
Wow.
And talking to her.
Wow.
But Chad,
yes, sir.
So introduce yourself to what you are doing now, and then let's go back into, just our life here in Prosperity and building up. But what are you into? What is your profession right now?
Yeah, so I run a 501c3 called Faith Wins and develop pastor networks to teach pastors to use their impact and leverage to maximize that in the public arena. Quite simple. We have pastors on our team in 17 states that I work with right now, but we've got pastors who are pretty loyal to me in 40 or 42 states. I probably couldn't do a whole lot in Hawaii or Idaho right now, but actually going to Oregon and Washington this summer for some meetings there. Just, the word's getting out that we're not endorsing, we're not helping a candidate, but I am earnestly trying to connect candidates to pastors, so biblical worldview is missing. Let's face it, there's a foundation that people are missing. So the pastors go from reluctance to, oh, wow, I did not know, what kind of impact it can have. So, I came out of the political world and now I'm more in the spiritual world. Now, what I'm doing is spiritual, but I believe it has a political impact.
Yeah, well, and that's why I wanted you here, because the purpose of this podcast, the purpose of this whole thing that I'm doing with MAP Media is to communicate to folks outside South Carolina what's going on. This state is going to play a huge role in the future of the country, electing political candidates, and anybody who looks at or thinks about the evangelical movement and all of that, you're right in the center of it, brother, and you're one of the leaders in it. And so I really look forward to having us have that conversation and what that means to others outside and the realism of that. Yeah. So before we get all into that, When was the first time we met, Chad?
Mike, I met you at Zion United Methodist Church in Vacation Bible School. I thought about this actually when you called
You remember
me.
when?
I remember meeting you because my mom taught VBS.
That's right. So
And
I remember her
head and
doing
shoulders, knees and toes, head and shoulders, knees and toes. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, running around the playgrounds of my first recollection of me and you hanging out at the swing set at Zion.
You were
down
3
south.
years. Yeah, you're 3 years younger than me.
Yeah.
And so we weren't in the same class.
That's right.
And so that's why I
Just
didn't
somebody I
know
looked
you
up
in
to.
school.
Yeah, I was probably 5 or 6.
Yeah.
In that recollection, but both our moms were massively engaged. And then the next big memory is your mama taught me 5th grade science.
That's
Loved your mama.
Oh, yeah.
And Miss Linda was, and I wrote down, Mike, I probably wrote this down 25 years ago, and I sent her a note before she passed, and I don't know if she was still,
Yeah, she
in a
wasn't.
good spot, but she never responded. I knew that wasn't her, but somebody challenged me. Somewhere I spoke, and there was another speaker. Write down the 10 or 15 of most important people in your life, and Miss Linda was one of them.
Oh,
Just
wow.
because she was an awesome encourager, but you never doubted that she was going to have a stirring classroom. But anyway, I remember you coming to 5th grade there at Rikard to see your mom, and right down the hall, down the far right hand side. I mean, and so she was one of those people.
I tell you, we're so fortunate, and I am. I mean, you and your family also, but I am to have a mother
Yep.
that everybody universally responds. My wife Anya, she's a teacher, and every time she says about me that she's married to me, well, she gets different views on that.
Imagine that. We're
Imagine
controversial.
that. But universally,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I loved his mama, and I'm blessed with that.
She, to me, was the iconic teacher.
Yeah, how just
Stern, go by the book, rules, but loved everybody unconditionally, and nobody doubted it. Nobody.
yeah.
Nobody in the room doubted she loved what she was doing, and she loved you, and she believed in you, and she pushed your bar higher every single day. 5th grade. I mean, I remember what an impact 5th grade was for me. You're struggling. You go out of elementary and middle school's kind of a big deal, and I don't know, 5th grade just was one of those points, and maybe it was because I saw my kids go through 5th grade and know the changes that go through a kid's mind, and your mom was just instrumental to me.
Well, she it's astonishing how easy it is to be a good teacher with sincere, intentional love to the students. And now with my wife in teaching now, she definitely has that. And why she's so effective with some of these kids, that unfortunately many don't, because she works a lot with the Hispanic children.
Yeah,
and it is it's just so amazing to see the work that she does so well, and so much good work comes out of it, and the students thrive under it, and people go, how do you do it?
Yeah.
How do you tell other folks? You just got to love and respect them.
Yeah. I think
it brings out that in them.
And I'm glad that your mom was such an example, and now your wife. It takes so much more time, talent, heart today, because the family breakdown is so prevalent.
It is.
It's sick. It's awful. It's sad. And we got to have teachers that love those kids, and it's unconditional, and
that's
and
right.
Put that discipline in that a lot of the parents, frankly, aren't.
That's right. So the other part we had, I mean, we grew up in the same community. We grew up in families that were key to this community for generations, and we also went to the same church, which was interesting for us because the way our community is part of 3 or 4 others that joined together to make one high school.
Right.
So our elementary school, we were all in town, but even when we were in elementary school, we all had a familiar sense with our church.
That's right.
Which was Zion Methodist.
That's right.
Which my great-great-great-grandfather helped form.
Yeah.
They were Germans. They were Lutherans. And at one point, he decided to become Methodist in 1820, the Second Great Awakening. He became Methodist.
Right.
And in this neck of the woods, the Germans, the youth, which he represented that generation, born in 1795, all the Germans spoke German. And they believed the Lutheran liturgy should be in German, the mother tongue. It was almost like Catholicism in Latin.
Right.
And these young folks were like, no, we're Americans. We want to speak English.
Yeah.
So many of them left the church and formed Methodist churches. Most of the Methodist churches around here came out of the German tradition.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
My great-great-grandfather, Jacob Beatenbaugh, had 3 sons, and then the son he had after he converted and started Zion Methodist Church was named Jacob Asbury.
Oh, wow.
Beatonbaugh.
Yeah.
And that was my great-great-grandfather.
Yep.
And the other 3 became Lutheran ministers and moved out of state.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. My other 3 brothers of Jacob Asbury, which show the schism, the sense of belief, the sense of fathers being a rebel and we can't abide by it, and they all moved away and became Lutheran ministers and leaders in the Lutheran Church.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Well, and that was when the denominational differences weren't that stark as they are now. They weren't as profound because the differences were language, not which Bible you're reading or is the Bible accurate.
Yeah, but the passion was there, though.
Passion was there.
I mean, the one of the main reasons many of the Germans were loyalists because they viewed, and our Beatonbaugh was loyalist. The reason, and they viewed the rebels, they called them down in Charleston, as Anglicans.
Yeah, that's right.
English-speaking Anglicans, when their king German was German like them. So that and even
funny.
here between the ARPs that lived in prosperity and the Germans lived on the other side of right now Mount Pilgrim Road, but that was the old Bush River Road. They call that the Dead Road.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, between the Scotch Irish and the Germans on the other side up until the 1820s or 30s. And I believe that was at Beatonbaugh's Gin House.
Yeah, that's right.
And I believe that was rooted in the sense of who fought during the Revolution the whole time, and who were Johnny-come-latelys, which the Germans were. They came, they went through until they swore an oath to the Constitution after the war. Right. So I think that's what was rooted in it too. But anyway.
Well, you know what else I remember about you?
What's
I
that?
remember you and Mac Vaughn.
Shout out to Mac.
Yeah, y'all were, I guess now we call it hazing us when I got in the Beta Club, 5th grade.
Not Beta Club.
I remember Beta Club.
Well, the annual staff.
The annual staff, but I'm thinking
was I in the Beta Club?
In middle school.
Oh, yeah. I definitely wasn't in high school.
Do you remember?
Got a little distracted.
The blindfolded and all that stuff they did. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Please remind me. What did we do to you, man?
You blindfolded us and led us around the playground. This is at Reichert. I distinctly remember being blindfolded and told that we had to mix up this concoction in buckets of water, and it was mud, and so the the reference of what that was. I remember coming home, it was mud and bananas. Oh my! I told my mom they made us, squeeze.
I bet your
but
dad
I didn't say a bad word. Oh no, they weren't happy. But she said it's probably just mud and whatever. I said, well, it kind of felt like bananas, but. Of course, they go nuts today over that stuff. But it was you and Mac. I remember that.
Well, I would say it was Mac.
Probably
and
Mac.
I followed it.
That was probably what it was.
Oh, my gosh. I forgot all about that.
Then, of course, the yearbook staff.
The yearbook staff.
You and I got close. I just had a blast.
Oh, it was so much fun. And
we had to develop pictures then. We didn't. Wasn't all that.
Yeah, we had a dark room. We made pictures. And I was in the band the first 2 years. And then Mac, which was my best friend all through school, Mac Vaughn, and he got on the annual staff, and he called me and said, I'm on the annual staff. I'm like, what do you mean you're on? What are you talking about? Because the annual staff was the cool kids who got to sit there and just do whatever they wanted to do. Kind of. Sorry, Miss Looney.
Yeah.
But I called the band director, and after spring practice, I called him and said, you got to find another bass clarinetist. I'm leaving. And I got on the annual staff.
Was that sophomore year?
That was at the end. I was on the band freshman and sophomore.
Okay.
And I got on the annual staff as a junior, which is when
I got on. Miss Mary Pat recruited me in typing class in the 9th grade. You need to do the annual staff.
When did you graduate?
81.
81. Okay, 2 years after me.
2 years after you.
Yeah.
And I got on freshman year, and you were doing photography, and you needed an assistant photographer, and then Coach Ken Long came along.
Yes.
Remember Coach Long?
Yes.
And died of a heart attack in the gym.
Oh, my gosh, I'd forgotten about that.
That was probably 84. I was at Clemson.
Oh, I was gone.
I was gone. You were gone. We were out doing our thing. But both those people, Miss Looney, of course, was hugely influential. In fact, Miss Looney, when her husband took his life, that was the first suicide I remember.
Yes, that was the first suicide all of us dealt with.
Right. But it was very personal. Remember, we were in the classroom. You may not have been in the classroom. It might have been her class. when she found out. That's my recollection. And I just remember what a big deal it was that they found, Mr. Carroll. And then when my wife committed suicide, 30 years later,
wow,
5 years later, I don't know. That was a prevalent memory of mine, was Miss Looney going through it. And for all I know, she told us about it later, and she was very emotional. I knew that. But that was the first one I'd ever heard of, somebody doing that. Wow. And so, but the yearbook thing was awesome. I love that. Your tutelage, your leadership. You were into it, And
I loved it, man. I had my denim jacket on, and I'm out there on the field taking pictures. It was
and that was fun. Back when you really had to pay attention to what you were doing. You couldn't goof this up, and because if you lost a roll of film, you lost all that stuff. And we were very, very concerned we would goof it up. We got some great pictures, and we probably took 50% of the pictures for the yearbook in those days. Easily.
Yeah, even more than that.
It probably was.
Well, I tell you, we'll share this. Nobody knows this except some people in the picture. But if you look at the 1979 Mid-Carolina yearbook and look at the group pictures of the Beta Club and those, you'll see little white spots in them. Well, the reason that is because Mac Vaughn would grab a handful of gravel. And when I take the picture, he'd throw the gravel into the scene. So when everybody looks at those pictures, and we would laugh. Oh, look, there's the gravel. And,
that's
poor
great.
Poor Miss Looney.
Do you remember we went to yearbook camp? I want to say it was like Sugar Mountain or something.
Oh my gosh, you remember that? I do not remember that.
Yeah,
Tell me.
And we won some awards. Remember there was a picture, you were standing beside me, and Robbie Lester slid into home before their accident. So he must have been a sophomore,
the accident, junior? Robbie had a bad car accident later.
Was that his junior year?
Yeah.
Because I thought I messed up. It was a double exposure of him sliding in and the guys running on the field. It just happened to be that way. And we won some awards for that stuff. I've got that somewhere in a folder or in a pile. I don't know where it is. But anyway, I tell Robbie that when I still run into him and see him. But that was cool. Before their accident. So
after high school, you went to Clemson. What did you major in Clemson?
Got my degree in engineering. I went to work for an engineering consulting firm, national firm called PSI, Professional Service Industries. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I did. I really loved it.
What did that engineering mean?
We did foundation design. We did environmental engineering. We did wastewater treatment engineering, flow, runoff, retaining walls, foundations. My first position, then I went to the Army. I spent some time in the Army. I was a tank officer. And that was really, I think, where God hit me with figure this out. I'd never doubted my faith, my patriotism, but I'd never been questioned. I'd never confronted, do I believe what I believe? Do I really believe what I really believe? Until the Army. And, you're climbing out of a tank that's designed to hurt people and it can't tell who. You start realizing there's something to this thing called freedom. There's something to this that makes America special, that people will volunteer. And there are people my age who went and died for this place called America. And for all the whining and this is a horrible place, there's a long line getting in.
Yeah.
And then you see all the people that, man, if I've been a place I didn't enjoy, I just left. I'm getting the heck out of here. We got such a great country, the people that hate it won't leave. That's remarkable.
So you went into the Army after Clemson?
Yeah, so I got
you had ROTC? Or?
Yeah. So I went into basic training through the National Guard, and then so I was able to accelerate, and I got commissioned in the Army after my junior year, and I ran a tank platoon in Gaffney. Then I had to go do my active duty after that. But I came out, it was in the time when it was the drawdown in the end of the Reagan years. So it's a thing called Division 86. They needed less majors than they needed captains. They needed, lieutenants. And so I decided I don't want to travel as much. And Michelle and I had gotten married, and I thought it's time. So I took that position in Augusta, worked for an engineering consulting firm, and it went really well. And then I ended up running the state. I was the youngest ever, what they called a senior division manager, and it was a good mix of sales, marketing, and engineering and management of an office. So had about 100 employees in 9 offices around South Carolina and Georgia, and I loved it. But my dad lost his job in '89, changed it again. When his boss, and it was kind of that time when they went around the middleman. He was a salesman for Amana Products and Quasar TVs. Remember that?
Yes, I remember him coming, and one of the Sunday school things, he told us about his first trip to Hong Kong.
That's right.
And about how all the buildings were covered in bamboo scaffolding.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. You got a good memory, too. And I don't know, when he walked in the door that day, and it was right before Christmas. Mm-hmm. My career was going great, and I watched him. I thought, wow, this is...
This is tenuous.
I decided never is going to be a time when somebody can tap me on the shoulder and say, we don't need you anymore. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
My dad lost a 25-year career to just a downsizing. And, I had a brother and a sister that he was still trying to put through college.
Mm-hmm.
And so Michelle and I are out, we're doing our thing. And I just watched my dad get devastated. I've seen my dad cry when his dad died, his mom died, my wife died, and then his wife died, and when he lost his job. And I don't, Mike, I don't think I'd ever thought that was that big a deal till then. Because you think, I'm not going to lose my job. And I decided I'm going to take control of this.
Yeah.
And that was really where I made my mind up. I didn't really do anything about it early on, but I made my mind up. I'm going to have my own deal.
And that was?
So started an Amway business in 91, and it went great. I found out, I had a knack for speaking
did, man.
and selling.
You had the
great.
personality for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the timing was right. I'd watched my dad lose his job. It became very, very personal to me. That a corporate, and let's face it, it was coming out of that time when you could work somewhere for 30 or 40 years and thanks for being here and here's the gold watch. And now people expect a lot of job changes, even complete career adjustments. And so Michelle and I built the business for 19 months. We made more money part-time we did in our jobs and quit. So at 27 years old, 28, I guess I was 29, she was 27. We're in our 20s and don't work for anybody. We work for ourselves, and we're traveling the world. I got to speak in Venezuela. That was cool. I got to speak in Poland. I got to speak in Australia.
You got the really high level, which was
there's a thing called Emerald, and we were heading to Diamond, and that's when she started experiencing the depression stuff.
So let's give some honor to Michelle.
Yeah.
Wonderful woman, and at the time you were. So we reconnected.
Yep.
At when I moved back from New York.
That's right.
And I reconnected with you when you were doing a presentation
That's exactly right.
Craig Ham's house.
You got a great memory.
Well,
I was going to say it's at Craig's house.
It was at Craig's house.
House.
And then we reconnected, and that's when I first met Michelle.
That's
How
right.
did you meet Michelle?
So she was at Clemson. I was a Clemson ambassador my senior year. I spent an extra semester thirsting for additional knowledge.
Bless your heart. You're just out front, aren't you, brother?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I wasn't intentional, but she walked in the door, and I thought I'm going to marry her. And
Wow.
apparently she asked somebody about me, and I asked somebody about her, and we dated for a couple of years. She stuck with me through the Army, which is crazy. And we got married, and I don't know, we grew up in life together. We were kids. I mean, we met, I was probably, 22? She was 20, and we were 19. We were kids.
Yeah.
And she got out early. I got out late. That's what probably helped a little bit. But, she just was helpmate, help meet, completer. Michelle was all that. And,
yeah, she was. And y'all had two children.
Had two little boys. CJ came along in 97, Bennett in 2000. She had some bouts with depression in 94. Mm-hmm. I had to hospitalize her for 35 days. And she had taken a medicine. Her mom and dad had the flu, and she took a medicine, and we really wrote it off later on to just a bad reaction. She had hallucinations. I put her in a mental ward.
She needed some help.
And so she went on lithium for a year, and it really changed everything for me. Yeah. We didn't have insurance. I mean, we're doing great. We're making plenty of money, but I'm paying out of pocket for psychiatrists and medicine that, and that's why they say they're practicing, right? They really, it's just a trial and error, back and forth, tug of war with their chemical imbalance. Her mom and dad, though, and I don't mind saying this, they're both in the grave and gone, but they were perfectionists, Mike. Michelle graduated with a 3.96, and both the B's she made were my fault. Because I'm like, let's go out. Let's go have fun. D for diploma. Let's get the heck out of here. And, what do you failed a test? You made a 14. I made a 74. You made a 74. My dad would be so fired up. And, I made some B's too, but not that many probably.
But she had such focus.
She was so focused. But, that was her downfall too.
Yeah.
She internalized everything. When she took her life, the psychiatrist at Lovelace up here told me that some people, our psyches bounce back, and she had been hit so much. Her mom died, and it spun her out the last time. That was a trigger, you think? It was a trigger. She was hospitalized 94, 95, never had another episode. It was the weirdest thing. And in 2004, and it was more like the blues. I wrote it off. It's she's just down. It's the blues. Postpartum, it was especially when Bennett was born in 2000. She dove a little bit, but she recovered quickly. It'd be like a week or two, and it was okay. In 04, it was harder. 05, the night Katrina hit New Orleans, her mom passed away.
Oh, wow.
And had knee surgery, knee replacement, and something went wrong. It was a fluke thing, and they kept that woman alive for 28 days until her nose, her fingers were turning blue. And I actually convinced her dad and her brother, y'all got to unplug her. She's not here.
Yeah.
She's not here. And so they did, and Michelle and her dad just, boom, off the precipice. Couldn't function, could barely talk.
So her dad kind of had the same
He did.
chemical reactionary things.
It sure looked like it. And Christmas, and now that I've been through grief, there's a numbness I think God lets us have that's hard, but it's a blessing.
Yeah.
And when he came out of his, she came out of hers. She built her house, Mike. She was she subcontracted everything for that house.
Well, that's when I brought my kids to come visit you.
I remember.
Because I was teaching at Newberry Academy. You were on the board.
Yep.
We had reconnected again. We
That's
keep
exactly
passing
right.
each other in our lives, and there we are. And I brought the kids out because I wanted them to meet your kids.
Yep.
And I was going through a divorce at the time.
I totally remember. We talked about post no bills.
Yes, and and so I always, after what happened with Michelle, I always was so happy that when I told my kids about it, they were able to say they knew her, and met her, and yeah.
She was one of those people that didn't have. She didn't have a negative thought about a person. And when her mom died, when Grandmama died after her mother died in September. Grandmama died Memorial Day weekend. We were in the nursing home. We were at Jesse Frank, and we prayed over Grandmama.
Now, you're saying Grandmama.
My dad's mom.
Gotcha.
And this was like 8 or 9 months later.
Right.
And she was better. This is 5 months after Christmas when she built the house.
Yeah.
She worked those subs. She got the right prices. $65 a square foot. You can't do that now. But it was because she was paying attention to everything. Hey, did you price this? And let's price this. And so, but Memorial Day weekend, my grandmama died. And in that nursing home room, me and CJ were right with grandmama's foot and had our hands on her foot. And I looked back at Michelle, and she had that 1,000-yard stare, which people that are out of it, they look right through you.
Yeah. They're seeing something else.
And I remember thinking, oh, crap, it's not good. And her dad, after Grandmama's funeral, her dad came and he criticized something about the house. It was under construction. It was just a little thing. You and I would just, big deal. And he left that day, and she said, my mother wouldn't have approved anything I've chosen. I said, hon, she's in the grave. This is your house. We dreamt of this. We saved for this. For years we saved. We scrimped and saved to build a house.
You haven't moved into it yet.
We had not moved in. It was under construction.
Right.
And Mike, she checked out. And it was 8 weeks later she put a gun in her mouth. It was almost 8 weeks to the day after he left that day. Yeah. And she was barely functioning for 8 weeks. It's weird. And
What a prison.
It's
what
hard,
a terrible.
It's horrible. And I don't know that I ever discounted it, but I certainly didn't. I diminished it because I thought, you can get over it. And I know it's real. I spoke at Chick-fil-A the week before, and they've been really good to me and my family. Every Monday they have a lunch and learn, and I was a speaker. And I did a talk on marriage and family. Now, nobody knew my wife's home with depression.
Yeah.
You don't tell that. You don't tell that. And I left her in Augusta with her dad, and Pop, she's got to take her meds. She needs to sleep, make sure she rests. We'll be back to get her when I'm done. So the boys and I went and stayed over there Sunday night, spoke at a church. Monday morning, we did their devotional, and then I did the lunch and learn. And I said this, and I'd never said this. I said, I've messed up. I've made mistakes. I've even had business failures. I'm not going to be a failure before God, man, my wife, and my boys. And the boys were sitting over here in the corner, 400 people. The whole corporate office comes to this thing, and you got like 35 minutes or whatever. The boys love the place. The original Batmobile's there. They're crawling on that. They eat all the Chick-fil-A they wanted, which kids.
How old were they then?
9 and 5. Wow. And I remember looking at them going, okay, Lord, that was a good line. I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
Well, that was Monday. The following Sunday, when we left her that morning, we prayed over her, and I prayed for God's deliverance. And went to church, walked back in. It was hot. It's July. It was hot. Mm-hmm. We had a little praise music in the background. It's kind of normal for us. And but the house seemed still and hot. And I walked in through the laundry room and through the kitchen. I saw in my office, I thought it was a stuffed animal. It was her hair. Oh, God. And so I pushed them away and I pulled her to me because you don't want them to see that.
Yeah.
Go to your room, go to your room, go to your room. They're hysterical. I call her dad. Michelle's gone. I call 911. I call my mom and dad, come get the boys. I lay her back down. It's the most unreal spiritual moment of my life. I felt the devil say, ha, ha, you failed. You said last week you weren't going to fail. Ha, you failed. I felt the Lord put on my heart, this wasn't my plan, but I have a plan. And I laid her down and Romans 8:28 punched me. Now, I wasn't reading Romans 8. I wasn't studying it, but I'd put it in my heart. Romans 8:28 says, and we know all things work together for good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And that I don't know, you probably read scripture. You're like, I'm not sure I read what I read. I got to read it again. That one punched me.
Yeah.
I laid her back down. I'm
Covered.
a mess.
Yeah.
I was stupid. But you don't think. I mean,
No.
all I thought was I don't want them to see this.
Yeah.
And I lay her back down, and I said, really, Lord, all things? All things. My wife's in a pool of blood, God, all things? And he said, you believe it yesterday? I did, Lord.
Yeah.
Would you believe it today? And trust me. And I told him I would. Now, I was a mess.
Was there ever a sense of your prayer for God to watch over her? Was this the way that God can now watch over her?
Oh, hey, brother. I've been through so many weird emotions on that deal.
Yeah.
I fainted in the casket room.
Yeah.
A buddy of mine caught me. Bennett said, Mommy would like this one with the angels. I beat myself up over being covered in her brain matter. When I go back to the boys, picking out a tombstone, you don't have that on your shopping list. You don't, let's go tombstones. You don't ever do that. The only thing I spoke at it, I canceled all my speaking. I was speaking for a living at this point. That's what I was doing.
I know.
And I just couldn't leave because the boys are tugging my coat. And I spoke at a Christian school convention and fell apart. And a mentor of mine said, I know what you're thinking. He and I rode to a dinner after I spoke. And I said, Dr. Mills, you can't know what I'm thinking. He said, well, I lost my wife 10 years ago, and I know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
I said, what? He said, I bet you're doing what I did when Pam had cancer. I said, Lord, I'm pastoring this little church. I'm doing all I can to serve you. Can't you just do me this favor? And here we are at Easter. It's pretty appropriate. He said, you know what the Lord told me? And I said, I think so. But he said, I think he's told me the same thing he's telling you. I did everything I need for you on the cross. It's okay. Yeah. And I was like, wow. So I boo-hooed the 6.5 hour drive home. I didn't eat barbecue with him that night. I just left. But the only thing I really went to after that, and that's how I met Dana, and I need to tell that too.
Yes, absolutely.
It was Palmetto Family Council. I was on the board. We had fought the gambling thing.
And Palmetto Family Council was?
The pro-family group in South Carolina. We remember the gambling stuff and remember the property tax fight. You were involved in the property tax fight. We were fighting all those things. This is bad for families, the fatherhood initiative, all that stuff. And I went to the November meeting. This guy comes up and says, hey, I know you're not ready. You got to meet this girl. This is 4.5 months after suicide. Mm-hmm. I said, JD, I love you. Get out of my face. Yeah. And to his credit, he did. I went to the December meeting, kind of to approve the budget before the end of the year. He makes a beeline. You got to meet this girl. JD, I'm having a hard time, man. I'm having a hard time. He said, and he got my grill, Mike. He did what a good friend does. He got my grill, and he said, look, you're Mr. Positive. I've watched you speak for years. This not going to beat you. He said, you know that talk you do about counting your blessings, not your curses? I said, well, I wrote it. He said, which none of us really like people using our words against us. and he said, go read your notes. Yeah. I wrote down 3 very specific prayers. One of them was, I didn't want a guy. If you introduce me to somebody, I don't want a guy in the picture. I never thought widow. Never. But I think that's what I was asking for. And I wrote down 103 blessings. Let's focus on the future. Paul says, forgetting those things that are behind. Mm-hmm. Which, you don't want to forget a great memory, a great 18.5 years of marriage. Yeah. In the next meeting in January, I said, what's her name? He said, Dana. I said, okay, big question. How'd she get single? And he hung his head and said, the same way you did. Oh, man. Her husband killed himself almost 2 years to the day before Michelle. And depression, and she had 2 little girls that were 2 and 5 when their dad died. So 6 months later, we're married. That's 15.5 years ago. What a great God story. Just providential. I mean, it's, the girls needed a dad, the boys needed a mom, I neted a wife. It's amazing.
It's just a God story. For those of us that love you and know you all your life, we watched this happen. Yeah. And it was just such a blessing for all of us to see that.
You wouldn't wish it on anybody.
And thank you so much for sharing that, because it's so powerful. It's such a testimony to faith, to the sense of the healing power of loving intention.
Amen.
You know,
I mean, it's hard to believe. Well, thank you. And I felt y'all's love and prayers, and people here, man, you know, how do people do in a big community? Our little community, I think it's what sets us apart, Mike. Yeah. I think that my mom kept track. 66 people brought us a meal. 66 people. I know. That number sticks in my mind.
There's so much mom. Tupperware.
Tupperware everywhere.
Tupperware stock goes up.
The casserole parade. I mean, people were unbelievable. What do they do without a community, a church home, a group of people around them that love them? And that's what you wish for everybody, because I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Grief's hard. Grief's hard.
Yeah. Lonely
is hard. I experienced a lot of emotions, and lonely is the hardest one. And I never was mad at God. I was mad at Michelle, and boy, oh boy, I screamed, sobbed, cussed, fussed, yelled. I did it. I hate it, but I know she's in heaven. I know she's fine. God's blessed us. Dana's been such a blessing. I didn't think, I had to ask God, can I love somebody who's dead in heaven, and can I be in love on earth?
Yeah.
I had to ask those questions. You go through these mental hoops that you just don't want anybody.
Well, we learned the initial sense of what is commitment.
Yeah.
And then what is that depth.
Yeah.
And then it's just how do you then reorganize that? And I went through that with divorce.
Exactly. It's still grief.
Oh, absolutely.
It's absolutely grief. And
except sometimes the ghost is there a lot on that end. But
I've had so many people tell me it's actually probably a little easier when they're not here.
Sometimes.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to deal with that, hurt.
That energy and hurt, and constantly be reminded.
And think about this, this is how God works. Boy, girl. And what if they'd been a little older? It'd been really hard putting little girls and teenage boys in the class, in the house. So CJ was 10 when we got married. Leah was 7. Bennett was 6. Summer was 5.
I mean, it was almost like a perfect.
It was.
Oh yeah, I was remember.
Unbelievable.
It was either you sharing it with me or me just hearing. Because we came, Bobby Dawkins and all of us, the moment we heard it happen, we were down there.
That's right.
At your place.
Yep.
And so, but then there was a sense of, for those outside that, it's like, okay, how do we help them? We don't just stay under his face all the time. We got to give them room and all of that. But so we were watching, and it's just wonderful. And it just makes me happy every time I see Dana walk into the store here, Food Line. It's like, I'm so glad you're here in this community with him.
Well, I'm telling you, she's a huge blessing. And her having gone through that, we still, there's still blue moments. There's dates that you just can't really get away from.
That scar tissue doesn't go away.
Yeah, it's a huge chapter of your life. She was only married 8 years to Barry. I was married 18 and a half. So Dana and I are now approaching almost the same amount of time me and Michelle. It's a big chapter in your life that you don't ignore.
Yeah.
But it's been a massive blessing that she and I have walked this healing together. It really has been. Yeah. But I wouldn't wish it on anybody, Mike.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. Well, faith is fascinating. That's what I wanted to talk with you about is my own faith journey, which has been something that's been very personal to me, but has moved me away from the conventional, traditional faith-based systems and something that to me seems a little more universal. But I understand the power of loving intention. Mm-hmm. And I believe God is wherever that is. And, I went through my journey because my big challenge growing up here in prosperity and having everything handed to me.
Yeah.
I mean, we were part of the privileged oligarchy of the community where our parents ran the community.
We had a great family.
We had great family structures and everything, and
they
traditions, grandparents, everything. And then I hit a wall when I realized I was going to drop out of college because everybody had gone to college. I tried getting into Clemson. I didn't. And I ended up going to Anderson just so I could drive back and forth to Clemson and party with Mac and and Boyd and everybody else.
Jeffrey Connor, I saw him the other day.
Oh, yeah. Shout out, folks.
Yeah.
I went through a huge thing where I thought the world was going to end. So I read a book called Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. You remember that?
I do.
And it was basically an Armageddon thing of saying, well, the horsemen are here and within a certain period of time. And I just went all in. And I was sitting here telling my granddaddy, oh, well, the world's going to be over. Yeah. And, of course, I was projecting my own sense of the world being over. What am I going to do? And I went through that. But after several years, I came out with the Navy with an even stronger faith, but not so doctrinaire, you know, just kind of more of a universalist sort of thing that has kind of guided me and enriched me ever since. It's a fascinating place we live in, where all of us together can be here and go through this. So let's talk about some of the issues that are important to you and that's going on in America. And you know, and you know how I feel about how the founders, and you know, one thing I started doing, because you had a book called Freedom Tide.
That's right. Good memory.
Right?
Yep.
And it was about the Federalist Papers and everything, and about the sense of freedom and entrepreneurialism, free market, and all of that. And so I've always been an avid conservative when it comes to the Constitution and original intent and all of those things. And so,
which is out the window these days.
Well, it is out the window these days. From both sides of the spectrum. And so I was on town council here in Prosperity and doing some things that I've always looked at the sense of being involved, because I think as a citizen, it's our duty.
Amen.
That's what we're supposed to do.
No doubt.
For a republic to work, you have to have citizens willing to step up and be involved. So I got involved in a local level, planning commission, board of zoning appeals, which I loved. It was nothing better.
You changed the county. I give you a lot of credit for changing the county. We had a county council that thought all the money's theirs. And until you stood up in that gymnasium in Newberry College and ripped that property tax, I was in there. The place was packed. And it really changed the direction of our county. I think it, you know, this may be overstating. I don't think it is, though. It was 2010 that this county first voted conservative for the first time since Reconstruction. First time, Mulvaney for a state, for a congressional race. It had been in Democrat hands since Reconstruction ended. And Mulvaney won that seat, and county council followed. And I think the seeds you planted, Mike, were a lot of that. When people started paying attention, going, wait a minute, what are we spending this money on? Is this government's responsibility, or is it mine? So
the issue that we're talking about is the property tax, and the county had been negligent in its duty because they have to do a state law reassessment every 5 years. Well, they hadn't reassessed in almost 15 years.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, people's property taxes were double, triple. There was ladies that were living in tiny little homes on Lake Murray where properties were $500,000 properties. They built a home in the 1950s, a little concrete block house on a little lot that was, when it was built, it was nothing. Nobody wanted to live on the lake in the 50s that much. And all of a sudden, their property, one woman's property taxes quintupled on her.
I remember.
And
in a year, property taxes.
Boom, just like that.
It about ran them out of their houses.
Oh, some of them it almost did. And so we had a big meeting at the Newberry Opera House. And they were sitting there, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to deal with it? And they voted to, yes, we are going to go through with this. And I just had a wild hair, and I just couldn't help it.
It was great.
I just walked down with my property tax bill, and I just looked up and said, there is something we can do. I just held it up, and
Mike,
the place
erupted. I've told that story nationally. When I talk about people standing up, I've got a litany of people that I'll point to as examples in different parts. And my buddy Mike Beatonbaugh did this about property taxes. And if we're not, to me, it's the most communistic tax. You save, you earn, you risk, you protect, you take care of. Oh, it's worth X dollars, and we get to pay for it. I think it is right in Marx's. It's right out of Marx's writings.
It's been something. Well, that's true, but it has been something that's been part of American tradition forever.
Absolutely, but it's been misabused. It's most it's the biggest thing that's misused by government
Well,
entities.
well, it is.
You stood up to it.
Well, it is, and so because of that, because the news that came about it, I got appointed to a board that was trying to eradicate the property tax. It was a group out of Charleston. I was on that group, and what came out of that, and the public pressure out of that group I was involved in, got the property tax changed to where homeowners had theirs reduced by 50% with a 1 cent sales tax.
Yep.
But then they kept it on the 6% assessment for businesses, which I thought was the biggest sin, because they say they want to help it, but all that does is put the burden of property taxes on rental properties and who rents properties.
Right.
So and I was furious, and I left the group, because I'm like, unless we can put this as a sales tax or figure out a better way. Now, there's a legitimate concern, and I know how you feel about government school, but there is a legitimate concern if we were to have some form of public school where people have control over their local public school. How do you fund it? And that's how it's traditionally been funded and set up in the 1895 Constitution.
I'm actually not against that. I think we just got to be smarter, and I think it just needs competition. How do we help teachers? Let's put more money in the tax into the classroom, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think the funding mechanism is the problem. I think that there's way too much waste in the system.
Oh,
way too much bureaucracy. We went from 85 school districts, we're finally down like 72 or 74 because of what Molly Spearman did. That's going to help. But every proposal that I've backed has been, let's push money to the classroom. Let's get it to the teachers. Let's make them more responsible instead of having all this bureaucracy here at the county level or the district level. So I'm not against the property taxes funding, that kind of thing. What I think you did, though, is you woke people up. For the first time in my lifetime, I had gone through this epiphany in the 90s. Do I really believe what I really believe? And I had a buddy of mine. We were driving along, Mike, in Winder, Georgia. And he had his Bible in the car, and I was asking him about my Amway business. I said, Jamie, I've never seen anybody ride with their Bible. I've got one. We dust it off, but I've never seen anybody with it in the car. I grew up Methodist. It was, non-expressive, more liturgical, more perfunctory. Yep. And he said, I said, what's this got to do with business? He said, nothing, but everything. Okay, now I'm really confused. And he said, have you ever read it? I said, well, I read it. Sure, I read it. He said, no, Genesis, I'll never forget this, Genesis to Maps. I said, no, I've never read it, Genesis to Maps. And he did a U-turn on Highway 78, and we went to a Christian bookstore, and he said, we're not socialists. You need to buy one. And I bought a one-year Bible. And except for the year Michelle died, I've read the Bible at least once every year since 91. And it was Jamie Nettles, and he's passed away. He died of lung cancer a few years ago. But it was one of the most important things in my life, because then I started really checking out for me, and I realized everybody's got a worldview. What dictates your worldview? And mine became dictated, is this the truth or is it not? And it was just an amazing thing. And I got to tell you, when you awaken people, that was a little bit what I went through maybe 10 years before. It made me go build my business. It made me go work on my own. It made me come out of the Army and appreciate the idea of freedom more. Mm-hmm. It made me want to be an entrepreneur. I can go down that list of things, because I stood in that gymnasium that day and watched that happen. It was a big deal.
Yeah,
I ran for state party chairman out of that.
Well, I sat there when we called, because after the thing at the Opera House, we called a meeting. Yep. We had it at the gym. 3,000 people showed up, Chad.
Packed.
I couldn't believe it. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, look at, and unfortunately we didn't really have the answers everybody wanted to hear, because it was, several of the councilmen decided to be there and talk and use that opportunity to talk, and the ability to push it kind of got stalled after that. But what really stalled it was the fact that the county said, yes, we will stop it. Because I tell you, I never forget, Mike Hawkins stood up. He was chairman of the county council. He stood up and he said, we hear you loud and clear.
I remember. I totally remember that. I mean, that was a big time moment for me, watching that happen, because people woke up. And look, I used that same kind of thing. I ran for state party chairman a few years later. After Dana came along, Michelle had passed away. Dana and I really we hunkered down for several years. I was doing school choice stuff. I was doing pro-life stuff. We were still working on the anti-gambling initiative. I was speaking all over the country, selling books. So I was setting my schedule, and I could be with Dana and 4 little kids. And then in 2010, of course, Sanford took his stroll. I took a stand against the party. The current chair wouldn't answer my questions, then accused me of leaking to the media the vote about censuring Sanford. Then Sanford called me. It was a whole long list of things, and I just couldn't believe they just weren't being forthcoming.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm running for chairman. And she decided not to, thank goodness. Then I had a few other people run. But all that was instrumental building blocks to make me want to do that. And I got to tell you, God used that in my life, because running for chairman, which was unpaid, really launched a lot of what I'm doing.
I know you were really involved. Well, after all that happened, I was so much in the press with it. I actually was approached by folks that wanted me to push for governor.
Yeah.
And I thought about it. And then that was when Nikki Haley announced.
Yep.
And then when she was anointed by our
Sarah
friend Sarah Palin, I'm like, yep.
It was over.
Yeah, I'm not touching that.
It was over.
And plus, I actually went through my second divorce anyway. So all those things just kind of pushed me back into life that I wasn't able to pursue that anyway.
Well, it's hard. And, but it was on, South Carolina is a big, bright spotlight. First in the South's a big deal. I was saying on the local interviews, that I think this brings in $40 to $50 million in South Carolina with no tax dollars spent. That's a home run for everybody.
Yeah, just the business of everybody showing up.
They're hiring people. They're going to hotels. They're eating at every Meat and Three and every breakfast place. And the Bill and Fran's is full, and Ronnie's is full, and that's statewide. And so I actually had one of my staff do a study. He was in the Moore School of Economics at the time, and he did a study. It was $50.2 million came in 2012, and I had this front row seat. And I did every political show on television. I think I did 57 national TV interviews, and it was on MSNBC that a guy named Reince Priebus saw me. And that's what led to the rest of it.
Well, the thing that gets me, though, that concerns me, is the tie of commerce to all of it. Because it kind of, it corrupts it. Because it's all about what are we going to do? Because that's what happens with the media.
It can.
And everything, and it can. And because I sat there and watched. I went and when Nikki Haley announced for president down in Charleston, I went down there. I went down there to see that. And let me tell you, she was fascinating when she was governor. She was there every year when I did the Preservation Awards. She signed the abandoned buildings credit, which you helped on your side. We had a bill that
we pushed that. I went and testified.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because we had a bill. I was head of preservation in South Carolina, and we knew we could create economic development if we gave a state tax credit to buildings that had been empty for more than 5 years in small towns.
Right.
It would attract investment back.
Right.
And
100% right.
Yeah, and so me and the attorney Chris Rogers and James Smith, Democratic. Which
I've debated James. He's a good friend now.
Oh, he's a dear friend.
He's great.
He is. And James sat there and said and did it and authored the bill and got everybody. We had universal support for it. It took us about 3 years to get it through, but finally happened. And this is when I realized how political Nikki Haley is, because I'll talk now. You don't have to. Because I'm sitting there.
I was chairman when she was governor.
And I'm sitting there calling the office, because I had a great relationship with her staff, because we've been doing this stuff together for a while. And I said, all right, the bill, we want to sign it. Let me know, and I'll get James and everybody to come. And everybody will have a big photo op. No word, nothing. And I went, and every time we went to do the awards, she called me behind the curtain to go talk to her a little bit before the awards. So I went behind the curtain, and she walked up to me, and she handed a pen and said, "You want to sign a bill?" So it was all her and me. Yeah. And I sat there and went, "Yeah, of course. Yes, of course. Well, of course we will. Yeah. Here's your pen." And which was thankful she did that.
Right.
And it was wonderful.
Right.
But
it wasn't in the pecking order.
Well, it wasn't in the pecking order, and that's why also I'm not much of a joiner.
Right.
It's like everybody.
What made you go to the announcement? That's cool that you went down there.
I wanted to see it.
Yeah.
I wanted to see the energy of it.
Yeah.
I wanted to see the emotion of how it was being communicated.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time with how things are communicated now, and Rush Limbaugh used to say, liberalism is symbolism over substance. Well, that was selective. Symbolism over substance.
Messaging.
Symbolism over substance is marketing, right? And both parties are all about symbolism over substance right
Especially
now.
now.
Especially now. And I'm so sick and tired of it.
I know. I think the world's so dumbed down, though. I was at D.C. I had a pastor retreat, a summit with my top pastors from 17 states this week, and Fox News did it. We sang "How Great Thou Art" in the rotunda. It was really cool, and Fox News picked it up, and they did a story on it. It was it was cool, and 80 pastors in the Capitol. But I was in the Jefferson Memorial Wednesday before I flew out. God who gave us life gave us liberty. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure? And we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people. These are gifts of God.
Yeah.
Indeed, I tremble for God's wrath. Mm-hmm. And I just thought about it because you're right. The symbolism or substance, man, we can't even hardly read those words today. I went and read the Lincoln Memorial and what he wrote in the Gettysburg Address on his lap on a train ride from D.C. to Gettysburg. People today don't speak that way, that eloquently, that articulately, that deep.
Right.
And it just feels like now the messaging is to the lowest common denominator. You watch a commercial, and I just feel dumber for watching that these days. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so you're right. It's not a side that has a corner on that deal. It's a problem. But its messaging has become symbolism over substance, and we now cater to feelings instead of facts. It's a problem. Right.
So I'm sitting there in August of 2015. I will always watch every presidential debate. Yep. Now, I used to live in New York.
I need to get you to one.
I would love to.
You want to go to one?
Yes.
I'll have tickets.
Yes.
I'll have tickets.
So I'm sitting there at home. I lived in New York. I know Donald Trump pretty well from living in New York. And that first presidential debate, I realized we have a problem. On my perspective of how decorum, of integrity and bullying. And I realized, oh my gosh, the world's about to change. Because everybody's saying, oh, what he said, nobody will support. I'm like, oh, no.
Which one was that?
That was the first one when he started calling Jeb Bush.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just.
I forget where it was. I was at the one in Vegas.
Where it was too.
I was at one in Cleveland, and I was at one in Vegas in the audience. And the guy knows his marketing. There's no doubt about it. He knows how to attract the crowd.
Right.
You know what's weird about it? When you're with him, I've been with him in small rooms, political discussions. I was at the RNC. I was running GOP Faith at the time, and so I got to be in those meetings. He's 180 degrees difference when you're like this with him.
That's the part that scares me, Chad.
Why are you? Well, I think it's because one of my speaking mentors, Charlie Jones, who's passed away, he's in heaven now. He said, "Be funny, make money, get people's mouth open with laughter, and you can pour the truth in. You get them listening." Trump does that in a different way completely. But I felt every time I've been in that room with him in a small group, how incredibly attentive. What do I need to know from you? Things the media would never show behind the scenes when you're walking in, and he talks to everybody.
I have heard that from so many people.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. You'll be so proud of that. And then it's the Apprentice, once you're on the TV cameras. It's an oddity. It's a masterful stroke in some ways.
Is it an oddity, or is it he just knows how to speak to people he needs to get attention from?
I don't know. I see such a deep sincerity when he's around me and you going through the kitchen. Doesn't talk to some. And I'm around a lot of politicians. I've been around, you name them, I've been around the last 12, 15 years. I've been around everybody who's run for president. I've got most of their cell phones in my phone, and a lot of them don't have a bit of that sincerity.
Right.
They're doing their best to avoid people. Trump went to them. I think it was his magic. He talked to the TV like me and you talk to the TV in our houses. Like he's talking to people, the anger, the frustration, the whatever else, the love for America. That was the magic. But I got to see that. I got a good glimpse of that at a front row seat. I think it's what you were talking about earlier. South Carolina matters in this process, and our advantage is if somebody doesn't know a candidate and we don't get the right one, it's our fault in South Carolina.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to have them all coming through here. I'm helping arrange meetings for different. I'm not for any of them. I'm not going to endorse, but I am absolutely I've talked to just about every campaign you can name, and I want you to be around my buddies.
Well, I would love to, because I have a deep mistrust of how the party system has established itself to where you really don't get the type of choices that most people want because of the party primary apparatus that goes to just a percentage of the most vocal, most engaged versus the general.
It's a money thing, right?
Well, and that's it.
It's such a money thing.
So here's what I did when I sat there. I'm like, okay, I gotta dig up all my Washington stuff, because here's the thing that I think is been the greatest sin of this nation in the sense of how people interpret its history and see itself, is I fully believe George Washington is the most important man that ever existed in the sense of the making America what it is.
100%.
And the reason that is, there's a lot of different things we can't go into because of time, but the one thing that did it all was in Newburgh, New York, right? When Gates got all the lieutenants up, they hadn't been paid, and for every good reason, Congress had done a terrible job.
Right.
You know, poor soldiers had bloody feet walking in snow because they couldn't get funded.
Yep.
But Washington walked in. They were getting ready to march on Philadelphia. Right. I think it's where they were. And every revolution that's ever happened, the revolutions never survived the children eating themselves and another second Civil War.
Yep.
Washington walked in and with the force of his personality stopped it.
Tamped it down, yeah.
He stopped it. And he set the tone that we are rule of law, and that's all that matters. And that, so then I studied his farewell address. So, okay, he's elected president.
Phenomenal, yeah.
And the farewell address is phenomenal. So I took the farewell address and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I started something called the Washingtonian Society. Cool. And I created a 501c4, but I didn't have the money. I did it.
Did
but,
a 4.
I did well, I didn't really know which one. I said, well, the NRA is a 4, so I'll do a 4.
You can do it. You need to do a 3 and a 4.
Well, so this was in 2016. I didn't have the funds to really push it. I created little pins. I created a web page. But the main thing I did was I took the farewell address and I made points of saying the reason we're here is not because people don't want to do the right thing. The government has structurally shifted that creates bumper guide rails to create this type of personalities, to create this type of feedback. And we need adjustment. Yeah. So the whole thing about the Washingtonian Society was creating minor amendments to readjust the Constitution to take into account of what has been created,
what we've learned,
of what's been learned.
Yeah.
And I want to share some of those points with you and see what you think. How much time do you have?
He's supposed to call me at 2:30. So
what time is it now?
2:03.
2:03. Okay. Let me just go through these because I want to get your feedback on these.
Make sure you email them to me.
I will. So political parties. So the way I did it, I set up, and I wrote my own commentary, and I went through his thing. So Washington had a healthy prejudice against powerful political factions as he witnessed firsthand the divisions it caused within his own cabinet.
Yep.
But here's his quotes. The spirit of party is inseparable from our nature, having its root in the strongest passions of the human mind. It exists under different shapes in all governments, more or less stifled, controlled, or repressed. But in those governments of the popular form, it is seen in its greatest rankness and is truly the worst enemy. And this is the one that really, really got me. Party serves always to distract public councils and enfeeble the public administration. It agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms, kindles the animosity of one part against another, foments occasional riot and insurrection. It opens the door to foreign influence and corruption, which finds a facilitated access to the government itself through the channels of party passions.
Yep. How profound.
Yes.
He didn't even know Hunter Biden. You know what I think he didn't expect?
It is so many others than Hunter Biden.
Oh, I know it is. I know it is, but Hunter's probably the best example right now. I mean, let's face it, that's a dirty guy. But let's go back.
There's a lot of dirty. But
let's go back.
Okay.
Here's what Washington nor anybody in his time frame anticipated. They never anticipated people being government bureaucrats and wanting to be there forever. I got to talk to a guy named Mike Pompeo, who, probably one of the most qualified guys to ever serve, right? Number one in his class at West Point, commanded troops in the field, a Secretary of State, CIA director, a congressman. Yeah. This guy, he has been behind the curtain.
He was kind of like Bush, what Bush Senior was.
I said, what'd you do wrong? You're going to be able to be back in some form or fashion. What would you do wrong? He said, we really thought that if we replaced the heads of agencies, we'd be okay. The problem was the people who've been there for 40 years and existed through 8 administrations. He said, that is a real problem. You know, some people call it a deep state. It's really just a bureaucracy that they don't care what you believe. They believe what they believe. And then I talked to people who are getting Americans out of Afghanistan. One of my Uber drivers this week in D.C. was an Afghanistan U.S. Army interpreter, and we rescued him. And that guy he cried about all his friends that we abandoned there. And he couldn't believe it. You know, and I'm against the endless war stuff. Well, let's have a defined objective. When I was in the Army, they told us, we're not going to leave your carcass there anymore. And to Pompeo's point, is this guy told me that the U.S. State Department was the biggest impediment to getting Christians and people out, people that helped us. Mm-hmm. The U.S. State Department was less helpful than the Taliban was in getting people out. And when they had to start giving out lists of people, then we want these people out. And if those people didn't get out, the Taliban then had a list of people to kill. And if they knew you helped America, they put a pole. They sharpened a pole in the front yard and put the dad on it, the mother on it, and the children on it if you had helped America. This guy's telling me his personal stories from Afghanistan, and it tied in what Pompeo said and what I've heard others say. And Washington never anticipated that a guy like Mike Beatmall or Chad Connelly, who we wouldn't want to be, they want to be in D.C. and be part of the power structure for 50 years. They're not really beholden to the Republican Party, the Democrat Party. They're more beholden to themselves and power. And we know how it is. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And decisions are made by bureaucrats every single day to spend money, to set regulations on business. I don't think Washington ever saw that. And he never saw the lifetime politician either. He never saw the lifetime politician.
That's the thing.
And he never saw the lifetime bureaucrat.
Right.
And I just think they were farmers. They had a goal. They had to take care of their kids. They couldn't be up there. This takes away from what I'm really trying to do.
Well, let me say one thing about the lifetime bureaucrat. Whenever you have a government this size, you have to have a professional class of people.
No question.
That come in and know and are not up to whether you're Democrat, Republican.
Institutional knowledge.
So there's a strength in that. The issue is the size and responsibility, and I call it the administrative technocracy. First of all, when Mr. Trump was constantly hollering swamp, I despise that word because, one, what is God's greatest gift as far as nature and diversity of wildlife? Beautiful thing is a swamp. Maybe cesspool, that's better. That's man-made, and you know what it's full of.
Right.
So, but that also does misjustice to the really good, dedicated people that help the keel stay straight. Because as politicians are doing this,
there's plenty of this.
And those need to be honored. But one of the big things I came out with the party system, and here were the amendments that we need to do. No government, let's see, there's a candidate for re-election, election. This is the biggest one. Can only accept funds from individual citizens who are qualified to vote for them, period.
Yeah.
And it could be
I love it.
And I think it could be any amount, but it needs to be shown what
what
amount
changed
is.
that? You know what changed that? McCain-Feingold. McCain-Feingold was a response to campaign finance stuff that allowed the unions to give money, but not people like me and you with our businesses.
Right.
McCain-Feingold started creating the 529. You just mentioned the C4, the C3, the 529s, the 527s, every bit of that. And the parties used to run it. Now there's so many other pieces. The left has almost 100 times the money from leftist organizations than the right does right now to influence stuff. It's big time Soros stuff. There's a group called Arabella that's taken that they've taken it to a whole new level. And I have numbers on this, but because I've had my people do some research on it. I love that amendment. McCain-Feingold ruined it.
Well, but it again, it's not a partisan thing on who's doing more because both of them are doing it. The issue is if you're sitting here running for a state representative in a state, to have tons of money pouring in from out of state to influence the election,
no doubt.
It's absurd.
It's absurd.
So there's one. That's got to end.
You know what else happened? Jamie Harrison pulled the most ever spent in South Carolina running in a race was $6 million. Inez Tenenbaum spending against Jim DeMint. It's the biggest I'd ever seen. Jamie Harrison raised $150 million. You know what happened in that race when they figured out Harrison wasn't going to beat Lindsey Graham? He funneled that money back because of his committee. He funneled that money to a bunch of states. Now Jamie Harrison's the DNC chairman in Washington.
Yeah.
Because he funneled it. He went, I don't know how many states he went to.
It's all about what money you bring in.
Yes, 100%.
no candidates for election, re-election can accept more than, well, I say more than 2,000, but I think that should be open to how much they can, as long as we know it's not one person.
Right.
Every donor needs to be listed above $2,000,
Yep.
something like that. Term limits for all elected offices.
I ran for Congress on term limits. Yeah, I think we got to have term limits.
Well, and the thing is, we got to have people now just to say, I will not run. If I ever run for the House of Representatives, I will say I will not run for more than this thing.
That's what I said.
No government decisions regarding redistricting has to be taken out of the state legislature politicians' hands.
Yep.
And do that. Now, here's one I don't have on this list, but I think it's absolutely vital. Two of them. One is when this government was formed, 1790, they had, for each representative was 30,000 people.
Yes.
Now it's 750.
750, about 750, 760.
That's got to be reduced. And you know what? It means making more seats in the House. We've got to figure out what that is. Personally, I don't think it's a problem having a lot more. But one, it would help gerrymandering issues in the rural areas by just making smaller districts.
It would.
That's important. And here's the one that's going to be the hardest. The 17th Amendment needs to be repealed.
Yeah.
Now, I hear a lot of folks on the left and the liberal side talking about how that's a right-wing conspiracy to take away power from people.
Yeah.
That's bogus.
No, it's bogus.
It's bogus.
I completely agree with you.
Because
we screwed up changing
we
that.
Totally screwed up, but it was being abused before, and the way it was written in the Constitution wasn't as clear, because the I mentioned I don't like calling them founders. I like calling them architects,
right?
Because they built.
They
something.
really did,
and they didn't realize the lack of sincerity in state leadership in using the appointment process to play games.
Right.
And so there's a lot of times senators wouldn't even be appointed.
That's
and
right.
all of that. So that could be fixed. That could be fixed with saying governor has to appoint, and then the state Senate can confirm, just like our president does for the Supreme Court.
Right.
But the senator is supposed to be an ambassador for the state.
Yes.
You don't have a balance of legislature if you have one being the hot coffee and the other being the hot. One is supposed to be where the coffee cools, right? And that's been eradicated. Yeah. I think a lot of our political conundrums on the national level will go away if the Senate had their constituency as the state government that they're representing.
I think you're right. And look, you and I have the same goal, because this is why I do a pastor network. 100% of what you're describing, 100%. I don't tell them who to vote for. I don't tell them how to vote. But I do tell them vote biblical values. But I do, and one of the biblical values is limited government. We have a problem, this far-reaching, ongoing, print money because you need it kind of thing. We have money for Ukraine. We don't have money for the southern border. I know people on the border, have pastors on the border, that they're finding dead people in their yard, on their ranches, in their people's churches. These kids coming across that are being sold in traffic, the fentanyl. We know that here in our county. And it's because the southern border is wide open.
And all the pressures of the economic pressures down there, these people are wanting the dream. Yep. I don't buy that these people are here just to take advantage of American systems. That's bogus. These people are incredible people, but they have lived in an area that has been abused for 150 years from a place. And let me tell you, my wife teaches some of these kids, these little kindergarten children, and you see the eyes of God in them.
Amen.
They are just these wonderful children, and the abuse and the things they have to go through to get here.
Can't kill freedom.
Horrible.
You can't kill freedom. One of my drivers in Uber this week was from Eritrea. It's East Africa.
Yeah.
And he became a citizen 5 years ago. He's been here 17 years. Took him 12 years. He had an American flag. He said, I love America. We were having this conversation in the Uber because I had a pretty good long drive. Got up really early. Had to be at a meeting at 7:30 in D.C., and we were staying down in Navy Yard. And I said, you got an American flag. Where are you from originally? Eritrea. I've heard of Eritrea, actually.
Yeah.
And East Africa. And he does this whole seminar. We got to make people do it right. We don't know who's coming over. We got no idea who's coming over. I was in a seminar that I spoke at, and the speaker before me, she held up a whole thing of armbands. Those, like the rubber bands you get when you go places.
I saw Kennedy at a thing showing these.
She held up a hand.
The head of Homeland Security didn't even know what they were.
I know they did. He didn't. Chad Wolf, the past Homeland Security, he's a friend of mine now. He does know what those are. This new congresswoman held up a hand. She says, you know where I got these from? I picked these up off the ground in my district in Texas. The cartels not only know who is coming across, those bands are color-coded and coded based on how much money you're worth, how much money they sell you, and where they sending you to, and we can't track them.
Yeah.
It's the cartels. And until we declare them a real problem, I don't see how you fix it.
Yeah. You need to get that?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So the big, we need labor. We need to have people here that will work that other people aren't.
That's a whole different topic, right?
Well, it is a whole different topic, but it's also the whole sense of just talking about the border. I don't understand why we can't have funded systems to try to help these people get in and just make it a civil system.
Well, when the president of the United States says, come to America, then you get a long line waiting. And that's what Biden and Kamala Harris did early on.
But also, Chad,
when
a presidential candidate says there's nothing but rapists and murderers.
That's stupid.
It's stupid.
That's stupid. We agree on that. But we have to have some kind of control system.
Oh,
too.
Absolutely. Because the symbolism of them just saying, we're open now,
we
open
don't know,
the floodgates.
You see how many Chinese military age people are coming across that we're not tracking. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing and where they're going. From 150 different countries that we know about have come across in these last 2 years. It's insane.
Well, the thing is, and this is why I mentioned up the party stuff, because for some reason, and both sides are doing this because they're being selective on what they talk about. You hear some hearings, and the Republicans in the hearing are saying things I agree with, when if it was another issue, they go the opposite because of what the Democrats are saying, or the other way. And it's really tiresome because there are solutions to this stuff, but we're too caught up in what this guy is saying versus what this guy, which is one of the reasons why I got involved just with the Alliance Party, just to say, let me just find something in here so that we can figure out how to discuss this stuff without going on symbols.
Yeah, I really would think we could agree with, let's just stop the flow now and then work backwards and deal with it. I mean, until we stop the flow, stop the bleeding, first thing you do in learn military first aid is let's make sure they're breathing and stop the bleeding. And I think we got to stop the bleeding to even have a solution.
Well, unless we have a relationship with Mexico, that's a positive one, not an insulting one. It's very easy for Mexico to say, sure, it's their problem.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but the previous president...
Well, they don't have control of the cartels.
They don't have control, right.
The cartels are the problem.
But all of this also is rooted in the foreign policy issues we had in the 50s with the Dulleses and all those guys on how Guatemala and all those countries were just devastated with foreign intervention. And so there is a huge societal problem down there that these people... I mean, they are descended from the Maya, and they're descended from the folks that have been turned into peasants because of the Spanish coming over them. Yeah. And so those are the issues these folks are dealing with. Anya's sitting here dealing with students, and she does ESOL, English as a second language. And the whole ESOL system is based on, well, they're Hispanic because they're coming from Mexico or Guatemala. Well, guess what? No, they're not. Many of them are Mon. Yeah. I mean, they're speaking a language. Yeah. Most of these 5-6 years old don't even know Spanish because they're speaking the peasant language that's descended from the Maya.
Yeah. This goes back to, and we know this, when I ran for Congress, I dealt with this way more than I thought I would. We've created such a laziness among people to pay them not to work. We've got to go back to what Clinton did with welfare reform, I think. We've got to have some markers there. You got to be searching for a job. You got to point out you're getting a job. We've disincentivized the things that work, and we've incentivized the things that create laziness. Therefore, we need an influx of people because a lot of our Americans won't work. You know this, small business owners, I can't get Americans to work. That's why I've got to have this influx of people coming from other countries. And they'll tell you that over and over and over again. So until we start disincentivizing lazy, and look, we've done that in spades the last few years. We're going to pay you not to do anything. We're going to pay you to stay home. It's a wrong thinking. And that's not a party thing, but that is a policy, a philosophical approach that's got to change.
Well, I agree, but I think that's been overgeneralized because I deal with some of these unemployed people here in Prosperity. There's also a lot of structure that goes into what jobs are available, what training is available. Right. And the guys I used to work with, I got 2 of them right now helping me build my barn. They're the hardest workers I know, but they can't get work. Yeah. And they're trying because they grew up in a place where they dropped out of work. They dropped out of high school. Yep. They don't articulate as well. Yep. And there's almost a permanence to underclass, especially in small towns like this, especially among black males.
Rural
especially. Yep. So the discussion needs to get away from, well, if you're on welfare, you're lazy.
No.
But
And I didn't want to insinuate that.
Right.
But we've got to have some markers there for people that are getting government assistance. We have to.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think this is where the federalism comes in
Right.
versus the national thing.
Yep.
And that will help with repeal the 17th Amendment and those sort of
That's right.
social systems. We've got to build a culture where the states can do that like they used to
Yeah.
versus the federal government. Because
100%.
right now what's happening, I
100%.
imagine it like clocks. So imagine a giant clock with a giant
Yeah. The pendulum
swinging is going to get more unstable than 50 clocks or little 50 pendulums. I
Yep.
mean, we've got to break this thing down, because in a country of aspiration, once you break away a focused aspiration and you break it up into all these other aspirations, we're going to break apart.
You know, and we need to continue this because you and I, this is awesome. And
So this is part one.
We got to get back. We got to get back to where this is doable.
Yeah.
We got people now, and look, this is from a biblical standpoint. But if you want to admit you're a boy or a girl and tell the truth, and we can't start with a basis, we're never going to fix the wall. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It extends out. We now have an argument over people that want to sexualize children and start chopping stuff off.
Mm-hmm.
And puberty blockers that we don't even know the long-term ramifications of. So we've got an entire set of people on the progressive left that seem more committed to disruption. I would love to have this conversation, but when they're shouting you down, I don't know if you saw the judge that went to Stanford Law School.
Yep,
Stanford Law School, elite law school, and the diversity, equity, and inclusion lady comes in and says they're not doing enough shouting you down. They should be doing a lot more. And he's like, we're trying to train you to be persuasive lawyers, not yelling at people like you're 17 and you're out of your mind and incoherent. And that's a problem in society when people who are in positions of authority are saying, yes, Mr. Judge, because you were appointed by a certain president, we need to yell you down. We don't need to have civil discourse. They're going to have a tough time in life.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to edify that long term.
Well, that's why I think all of this stuff, and it is happening, but I think all of this stuff is short-term reaction to certain societal stuff, and I honestly think this stuff will self-correct.
I do too.
It will self-correct, but unfortunately,
that.
There's so much focus on it as if we have to save us from that.
The media loves it.
Well, everybody loves it. The party loves it too, because you sit here and look at certain media outlets, they focus as if that's what America's turning into, and it's not. It's a generational, marginal thing that is easy to distract, and let's find more drama of drama, so we can elevate that. Well, and I think it's elevated more than it is, but it's something we as adults just have to face and work through.
That's right. And teach our kids better and make sure they're not influenced by the toxic nature that is, I don't want to have a discussion with you. I don't have civil discourse. You believe this and I believe this, and we can't have a conversation. I think we had to get back to having conversations because that's how you find solutions.
Well, that's what this place is about.
Yeah. This
is part one, my friend.
All right, brother. You're on.
You were so busy, and I got to get an hour and a half out of your time between Washington and somewhere else.
Well, I'm not traveling a ton. This is my press reset, do my fundraising. I'll be in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, because those are early states. That's where I'm going to build out pastor networks in the next few months. So I'll be here a lot more.
Good. We'll stay in touch. This is part one. And remember, place, purpose, preservation. Thank you, buddy.
Amen. Love you, brother.